beforehand that are key requirements of the job, then I suggest to them that actuarial science should perhaps not be what they consider.
And I mean, that's an interesting comment in that I would say that I actually really didn't enjoy my undergrad, in the sense that I don't think I really understood what I was working towards. And then when I got to honours and we started doing sort of integrating everything, and, there was the actuarial control cycle, I was like, oh, okay, I kind of understand where this sort of all fits in. And why is it that it's designed that way? That you sort of, you have to build your technical prowess, if you want to call it that, before you can engage with more the environment of being an actuary? Or do you think that just takes time to sort of integrate in your mind because you are exposed to it? Or why do you think that there is that sort of that feeling often where people don't actually know what they're doing until they're much older? Do you think there's a maturity thing, or what would be your view there?
So, a very good question. I think it's a combination of a lot of what you've touched on, but I'll also tell you that if you were to go and do medicine, in your first year, you study physics and chemistry.
Oh, of course. You're probably like, what?
And if you look back to when you started in grade 1 and you started with your numbers and your times tables, those were foundational to be able to do the mathematics that you did in matric.
Yeah.
And we try to tell people all the way through the degree that we first of all teach you how to use the tools. Then we start to teach you how to use them to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And then later on, we try to teach you how to run a business that involves those problems. So there is an order and development. It's quite common. So we have two types of students. So we have some who love the technical work.
Yeah.
And when they get to the honors level, they're disappointed because they loved the technical work.
That was lovely.
And we have the other set of students who tolerate the technical work, but they love the applications and the solutions.
Yeah.
And the actual profession needs both types.
Yeah.
Okay, and there are different roles for people in those areas. So the actuary like you, Mark, you can probably land up being really good at dealing with clients and selling solutions and listening to their problems and designing products and marketing them, or perhaps in education and lecturing and teaching.
Yeah.
Okay, so your personality determines what you are, but how we teach is very difficult. So initially, we've got to teach people so that they start to think in a certain way and develop the problem-solving skills before we can actually say, these are the types of problems that you need to solve. Because if we gave them the problems without the tools to solve them, they would probably be even in a worse position. One of the things that I use as an analogy when teaching is that I say that initially when you start actuarial science, let's imagine we're going to be a furniture manufacturer or retailer of furniture, maybe dining room tables and chairs. In first year, we teach you to saw the wood and to plane the wood.
Yeah.
And we learn to put a screw into a piece of wood and to hammer into a piece of wood.
Yeah.
And decide whether it's more appropriate to hammer or to use a screw or to glue or a dovetail joint. At that stage, you don't even know you're building a chair. You're just working with wood.
Yeah.
As you go into the next levels, we start to put together and you know you're building a chair.
Yeah.
Once you've got the piece of furniture finished, we've now got to talk about how are you going to get that chair to your customer?
Yeah.
How are you going to distribute it? How are you going to set up a business? Where are you then going to source the material, the wood?
Yeah.
What are the risks that you can take? And eventually the actuary is the person who runs the business. But we start off at the beginning with a piece of wood.
Yeah.
And you've got to go through. That's why I think it's very important that qualified actuaries teach students from the first year of study, so that while they teach, they can still give a vision and a link through to why they're learning something and why it's going to be important. But the student will only know that big picture as they get later into the studies. They'll get that aha moment when they now see, so this is where it's all coming together, and this is why I had to go through this.
Yeah.
I presume it's the same for a top sportsman. They would have to get physically fit and lift weights and run around fields before they were actually put into a football team or a netball team or a hockey team and learn to play the game. Because if they weren't fit enough when they went onto the field in the first place, they'd be the weak link in the team. And they'd actually hate the sport. Not because they can't do the sport, but because they weren't equipped to actually play in the game when they got onto the field.
Yeah. I think something you said earlier was that actuaries have to be resilient. Now, I think, it's easy to say that when you don't have to develop that resilience, but when you're sort of in the thick of it, I remember for me, particularly in second year, sort of being at like a watershed moment where I was like, I'm either out or like I need to be all in. And how would you sort of advise the students go about building up that resilience? Because there is that element of, you're failing tests sometimes, you feel bombarded, you've mastered one subject and then the next subject kind of feels like it slaughters you, like how do you go about building up academic resilience? And I know that that's quite maybe a vague question, but from your sort of educational background, how have you seen successful candidates do that?
So it's now almost a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
So are the successful candidates the ones who've already got it inside them innately, or is it something that people can learn? So we try to explain to students that they've come out of a school system that didn't really stretch the top end of the class.
Yeah.
It wasn't designed for the top end of the class, but they're now, for the first time in their lives, in a class of their peers.
That was so difficult for me. I remember.
It's difficult for most people. And most people have measured their success in school by the fact that they're always at the top or very near the top of their class.
Yeah.
And I tell first years from the word go in first year. So I get the first year class to put up their hands if they were in the top 3.
Oh, yeah.
And virtually the whole class puts up their hands, and then they all look around at each other.
Yeah, I remember you doing that to us.
and I tell them that only 3 of you can, by definition, be in the top 3. But that's okay. Okay, success is no longer being in the top 3.
Yeah.
Success is getting through the degree. So the first thing that you have to do when you're trying to get people to be resilient is to get them to have a much more realistic assessment of what success is.
Sure.
And as a student studies, they're always at the cutting edge of difficulty. When you look back, the work always looks easier.
Yeah, I know. I mean, even now I look back and I'm like, oh, it was fine. At the time I was like, it was not fine.
But at the time you're always being pushed. And if you weren't being pushed, you weren't developing and growing.
Okay.
And that's why you've got to get to be comfortable with that. So it's important that you also can talk to your lecturers. Okay?
Yeah. And make use of that, right?
Very much make use of that. And your lecturers are the best people because they are teaching you, they are marking your work.
Yeah.
Okay, they can see what you're doing and they can give you advice because they've seen many, many people in a similar position. And effectively, the resilient student is the one that realizes that learning is difficult.
Sure.
You don't come to university to learn material you already know.
Yeah, otherwise what's the point, right? Yeah.
Correct. We should give you a refund because we're wasting your money.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're coming to be strained. I mean, it would be the same if you signed up at a gym. If you didn't push the weight to the point of exhaustion and your physique didn't change, you're not getting the best out of the gym.
Yeah.
That's not going to be easy. That's not going to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And it requires discipline and dedication. And studying is exactly the same.
Yeah.
So what we try to do is we try to make certain that the student realizes that they have to work much harder than they did at school, much more consistently than they did at school, and much deeper than they did at school.
Yeah.
And over the course of the first year or two, we also give the students advice. Some students really struggle with the unstructuredness of the actuarial and statistical world where they have to impose that structure.
Yeah.
And those students sometimes have to accept that they could be brilliant mathematicians, computer scientists, economists, and they move off into those various areas, and they can become eminently successful.
Yeah.
So even if I look around me at Wits, the number of people that came to Wits thinking that they wanted to be an actuary, who are professors now in other disciplines at Wits is amazing.
Sure.
Economics, in applied mathematics, in pure mathematics, in computer science, even in psychology. Okay? But our degree program allowed them to recognize where their strengths lay and move into the right areas.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the most important thing, is when a student comes into university, they should be given a degree structure that they like. And as they grow and develop, it can be accommodated to reflect their new learnings, what they're good at, what they're not good at, what they might want to be. So roughly speaking, we take 170 new first years out of matric into first year. We take roughly 10 people who transfer from other first years. Usually in engineering, pure mathematics, computer science, applied mathematics. But we're very, very select. We have people transfer from medicine who do 1 year of medicine and discover that medicine is not what they want to do. But we have very few people who do that successful transition. But we have about 10. And we allow 20 people from the previous class who didn't pass, but showed that they were late developers, but they have potential to repeat. But effectively, we take 170 new students in and perhaps 10 transferees. So we have roughly 180 students. 120 of them finish their degree in actuarial science.
Not necessarily simultaneously.
Not necessarily simultaneously. Some will do it in the 3 years. Some will do it in the 4 years, and a much smaller number will do it in the 5 years. Ours is a 3-year degree.
Just for clarity purposes.
Just for clarity purposes. Okay. But, and I haven't analyzed the data since COVID, but pre-COVID, 98% of the people who came into our first year class left Wits with a degree. And that was the most important thing, was for them to leave with a degree, because it's that degree that changes their life. So that first year needs to be flexible enough to allow you to move into the areas with as little a loss of year of study as possible. Okay. But the chance for resilience is there. But you've got to demonstrate it. There's support and you have to demonstrate it.
So another question I would ask you, and this is maybe a little bit off the wall, is that I remember when I was in first year, you made us do a book report.
Yes.
Now, can you just explain to me, what was your reasoning there? I mean, I loved reading the book that I did do my book reports on. I think I did mine on Blood River. But I think maybe now I have more of a sense as to why you made us do that. But could you sort of highlight to our listeners why that was necessary?
Sure. So remember what I said to you, an actuary uses 2 languages. One of them is mathematics. And the other one, in most likelihood, is going to be English. It's certainly going to be English in terms of the actuarial exams that they write, if they want to qualify through the Actuarial Society of South Africa.
Especially those later exams.
Or the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. But it's also a very key component of how we give them questions. Our questions come to them in English, and they have to be able to read and interpret it. But as I tell all students, while we're doing a podcast now, you can read much faster than you can ever listen. And one of the things that an actuary has to take in is information and data to act on. So the ability to read with comprehension and the ability to read for knowledge is a key requirement to become an actuary. So in the same way that at the beginning of our degree, we're working on your mathematical skills, we want people to start working on their reading skills and the ability to read for information, enjoyment, and comprehension. And the book report is a way of getting people to understand that although their degree looks very mathematical, it's not only about mathematics. And it's about them understanding that later on, if they can't read, they won't be able to write. And if they can't read and write, they're not going to become actuaries. Those skills are all very important.
And I do remember at the time being like, what? I didn't sign up for this. I think another thing in first year that was odd for me, I remember when you were talking to us, where you just introduced sort of the concept of an actuary, you had said, there were certain subjects that we did at school that you said would be helpful in becoming an actuary. And one of them that you said would be helpful was history.
Yes.
Can you just expand on that? Why history?
So the most interesting thing about what an actuary is someone that builds models that we calibrate by looking at the past
Yeah.
to try and predict the future.